There is an epidemic of missing and murdered Native American women in our country. It's an issue that doesn't get nearly enough attention or resources. Today we're going to hear from two women who have dedicated their lives to helping Indigenous women overcome obstacles and hardships. With this episode of The Hot Dish, I hope we can help more people become more aware about this hidden crisis in our country and help encourage action to stop it. We'll also talk about what is needed to fix what's broken with our tribal justice system so that victims are able to get the justice they deserve. One idea I've put forward is called Savannah's Act, which aims to help tackle these challenges and improve cooperation among law enforcement agencies at all levels. First up, we have Lisa Brunner with us. Lisa is the co-director of Indigenous Women's Human Rights Collective, Inc., and policy consultant to Sacred Spirit First Nations Coalition. In these roles, Lisa advocates for victims of domestic violence, sexual assault, and sex trafficking. She's worked in the domestic violence and sexual assault field for over 17 years, advocating on the state, local, and national and international level to bring about policy changes. Lisa is also a founding member of the National Congress of American Indians Violence Against Women Task Force. Lisa, thank you so much for being part of this important conversation and for sharing your expertise with our listeners. I think this is not an issue that is well understood. It has been invisible, as have been a lot of issues that involve crime victim stories of what happens to Indigenous people. And so, first off, I'd like to lay out the reasons why we have a crisis of missing and murdered Native women for our listeners who may not know much about Indigenous history or the realities that tribal communities face today. And I think it's a complicated and multifaceted issue, really involving historic trauma, law enforcement jurisdictional challenges, racism, increased risks of human trafficking and domestic violence, and the list goes on. How did we get to this point, and do you see any reason to be hopeful going forward that we can, in fact, change hearts and minds and get attention to this, Lisa?
So to answer your question in regards to the level of the high rates of violence that Native American and Alaska Native women face in the United States, which is far greater than all other populations of women in the country, and including for some Native women on some reservations, face the murder up to 10 times higher than a national average of the United States. And a lot of it really stems from the historical context of colonization and the institutional racism that came from that, because there was a time and space where through U.S. federal laws and policies, they led the attack to pretty much commit genocide against Native American and Alaska Native people here in the United States. The forced removals to reservations, the taking of lands, imposing laws that limit tribes and pueblos and Alaska Native villages from being able to protect their citizens from non-natives. So that's just a historical context in a very quick nutshell. And am I hopeful to the changes to be able to come? Absolutely. We've been seeing incredible amounts of changes through federal laws and policies with the Violence Against Women Act when it was reauthorized in 2005 to have we have our own tribal section, Section 902, called Safety for Indian Women. In it increased funds from 5% to 10% coming to tribes and Alaska Native villages. It increased access to NCIC, the National Crime Information Center, which unfortunately a lot of tribes still don't have access to. So I applaud your efforts within Savannah's Act that outlines how to help tribal nations and Alaska Native villages to be able to have increased access to these databases that had become in federal law in 2005 with VAWA, reaffirmed in the Tribal Law and Order Act of 2010, and then reaffirmed again in VAWA of 2013, which also extended tribes' ability to try non-natives to come onto our territories and commit acts of domestic violence, dating violence, and violations of order for protections. So I'm very hopeful that, through the scope of time, through the timeline of history, there has been a change from that colonial mind frame to working together to be good relations with each other, from a government-to-government relations, to really improve response for the, through Indian country and Alaska Native villages, but also to really secure homeland security, to ensure safety for all citizens in the country.
Well, and when you look at kind of the history, we've done tremendous work in building out victims' rights organizations. North Dakota just constitutionally passed something called Marcy's Act, which gives crime victims even more power and control over what happens in prosecutions. Overwhelmingly that bill passed, but yet crime victims in Indian country tend to get forgotten or marginalized, and so I think it's important that we understand that all of the great work that's been done in victim assistance, kind of nationally, hasn't always found its way into Indian country, and we need to fix that. So I guess the question is, how do we begin? You take a look at the Canadian effort, which is the National Inquiry into Missing and Murdered Indigenous Women. And although there's been some controversy around how successful that's been, there are valuable lessons I think we can learn from the Canadian effort. What do you think we can, in fact, take from that Canadian effort and build on the work that they started, but also raising awareness here? How do we learn from what happened in Canada, and how do we move forward? And what do you expect will be the outcome of that work up in to our neighbors to the north?
What we could learn from that and what we could take from that is that I think here in the United States, we should also do a national inquiry. Because how they're doing it, they're holding listening sessions or field hearings, within different territories of Canada, and I think that's a very important start. Because I was looking at your one-pager outlining Savannah's Act, and that in 2016 you had over 5,000 Native American, Indian women that were reported missing, and it's very complex, like I said. Even though there's, with the crime victims, increasing funding for crime victims, that's positive outside of Indian country and Alaska Native territories. So it's important that when we have listening sessions or these field hearings, that we have to look at the complex jurisdictions. So I think it would be important to go into non-public law 280 jurisdictions, which there are 200 of the 566 or 67 federally recognized tribes. 200 and some are in non-public law 280, which is the federal jurisdiction. So like the state of North Dakota, that's FBI, Bureau of Indian Affairs, federal prosecutors, and so forth. And then you have public law 280 states such as Minnesota, California, Nebraska, that's under state jurisdiction, and which is very complex and very different. But I think it's also important that you take a visit to Oklahoma, because it is checkerboard, how their land base is laid out, and that too is very complex in its own. And also to be able to go up into Alaska and to Alaska Native villages. And then also important to look into urban areas, because 80% of Native people, throughout the United States, of all of our tribal nations, actually live off reservations. And so look in urban areas, to have listening sessions as well. Because what Canada is being able to grasp from that is really the complexities of what are the barriers to reporting, what are the barriers in a response from law enforcement, what is the level of institutional racism, where is the breakdown when calls for help happen. And for here, for instance, in the United, for our tribe in White Earth, some of the issues is that if you call 911, the first question that may be asked is, are you tribal? Well, that shouldn't matter. Because if you're tribal, they'll say then you need to call tribal law enforcement and either hang up on you, or they may transfer your call. 911 should be, meeting that immediate address, responding right away, because it's life and death. Otherwise, a lot of people really don't call 911 unless they really need help. So that there's that aspect to it. So and some of the things that in Canada, they're investigating investigations by law enforcement. So they're also bringing in commissioners to do forensic investigations in regards to law enforcement. So it's not to point out and say law enforcement's not doing their job. It's about looking at how can we improve their response. What kind of training needs do they need? Because when we look at the complexity here in the United States, which is a bit different than up in Canada, because you have tribal jurisdiction, state jurisdiction, federal jurisdiction, and I don't think there is really a standard of practice across all law enforcement agencies. So how do we look at that? And when we can look at that, we can begin to see where are the breakdowns and where do those improvements need to happen across the board for both Indian country and Alaska Native villages and in major urban cities, like a city like Fargo. The other piece is also knowing the complexities, like up in Alaska Native villages. They have PSO, public safety officers. Some of them, they're trained through the Alaska State Troopers, but some aren't. They're not armed. They're just getting basic training that they need to be in the villages. So how do we really look at, ensuring the safety of indigenous people as a whole, because we're victims of violent crimes 2.5 times higher than the entire population of the United States, and 88% of those perpetrators are non-natives. So again, it's if we could do a national inquiry and to be able to have listening sessions / field hearings, I think we'll really get the true grasp of what are the undertones that sustains the level of violence against indigenous people, in particular our women and our girls, our children, and looking at the murdered and missing indigenous, women's issue. Because when you have tribes that are prevented through federal laws and policies that are prevented to hold non-natives accountable across the board, it kind of sets the tone that our lands are predatory grounds. And we're seen as less than the rest of the population throughout the country in regards to our safety as Native people, in particular Native women. So I think there's a lot of positive things that can come from this.
I think, this isn't the only effort that we're undertaking. I have long believed that we have an anemic response, federal response in Indian country, and that has basically allowed tribal populations to become victimized, whether it's cartels that come in who want to sell drugs, whether it is people who want to perpetrate and to prey on Indian women and Indian children. We see it over and over again. And when there's no, as I say, cop on the beat in my state, then why not? I mean, it's open season. And so I've had a long conversation with Director Ray about this issue. He has assured me that he's taking it quite seriously, assigning some of his top people to take a look at how we can do a better job, because if people think they can act with impunity and there is no law enforcement consequence, they will act with impunity. And to your point, you dial 911 and the first question you get is, are you Native? And that's a logical question for someone to ask, because jurisdiction is challenged, but we need to make this seamless. And I will say I've talked to the governor of North Dakota about this, and he's looking at doing more with memorandums of understanding, doing some cross-jurisdictional work, but that's not going to get us where we need to go. Another companion piece that I'm doing is the lack of Amber Alert in Indian country. And so if a young girl goes missing, it's virtually impossible for, it is impossible. There is no Amber Alert.
Yeah.
And so we want to make sure that the same kind of Amber Alert that would go out in the community of Bismarck is the kind of Amber Alert that will go out regionally in Indian country in North Dakota and across the country.
Yeah, absolutely, because currently I know that DOJ is working with, I believe it was Navajo Nation and different ones, in regards to being able to have access to Amber Alert. But this should be a no-brainer that all tribal nations and Alaska Native villages should have access to Amber Alert, because for here, I'm speaking to Sonoma County. I'm speaking to, mothers who have shared their stories with me, stating that they have called and asked, that their daughter was missing, and they got one or two responses. As one, we have better things to do with our time, or two, why don't you be a mother and know where the hell your daughter is? And that's not acceptable, because when children go missing, it's so important. It's an actual critical moment in time that an Amber Alert is issued to be able to find these children. Our children is no less important than any other children in the country, but yet we're treated in that capacity that they're not, and that definitely needs to change, because that mentality is what continues to sustain the level of the institutional racism, but the level of lack of response that happens within our territories.
Well, I can tell you that recently I sat down with just some women from Standing Rock who, within a matter of minutes, were able to come up with a list of 25 missing or murdered women from their tribe. And when you can just do that on the back of an envelope, there is something that needs to be addressed here. And so I want to thank you so much, Lisa. We'll keep you posted on the progress of Savannah's Act, but it is so important that we raise awareness of this concern, that we all work together to solve this problem.
Thank you, Senator Heitkamp, for inviting me to be on your talk show this morning, and applaud your efforts for Savannah's Act and to really leading the country and raising the issue to the murdered and missing Indigenous women and girls in the United States and in Alaska.
Well, you're welcome. I thank you for your ongoing and continued leadership and all your hard work. This is a tough area to work in, and I always applaud those advocates, because every day you see things that the rest of society doesn't look at, and this is certainly an area that can diminish your soul over a long period of time. So thank you so much, Lisa, for the great work you do.
All right. Thank you, Senator Heitkamp, and thank you for your work.
You bet. Next, we'll talk with Sadie Youngbird. Sadie, who is a great friend of mine and also the director of 3 affiliated tribes victim services located in Newtown. That agency empowers individuals who have been abused, victimized, in emotional distress, and in need of resources or emotional support. She has been the long and a very hard-working director for 7 years. She previously worked for 8 years for Fort Berthold Tribal Facility and the Texas Department of Criminal Justice, where she worked 8 years in correction with reentry programs and offender services. She studied criminal justice with minors in sociology and psychology. She lives on Fort Berthold Indian Reservation with her husband, 2 sons, 2 daughters, and her brother. Sadie, thank you so much for speaking with us today and for continuing to do the great work that you do. I think it's amazing to me, someone in Indian country knows personally someone who has, pretty much everyone in Indian country knows someone who's gone missing or has been murdered. And I've personally been given a list of names by tribal members in our state. And I was struck by the fact that when someone can just sit down with some friends on Standing Rock and come up with 25 names that they knew collectively that had either gone missing or were murdered, that is remarkable when you think about the percentage of the population and what a huge impact that has in the community. And I think you see it probably every day, a lot of the challenges for women who are victimized and marginalized. And so I wanted to visit with you and ask you where you think the changes have happened and what more we can do to bring awareness to this problem and to help organizations like yours continue to provide that very important service that you provide right at home on the reservation.
Murdered and missing is like near and dear to my heart. My best friend went missing, and then she was found deceased 5 days later. And the biggest thing, personally going through it, what I found was that we're missing protocol. We're missing the step-by-step policy and procedures, how to deal with murdered and missing people, how to collaborate with other programs. You know, when I was right there in my own shoes, all my professionalism went right out the window. I was just a mess. I didn't know what to do. And so since then, it's been so close to my heart that I know exactly what other families go through. And it's a, it's something that's not talked about until it happens in your family. And now that it's becoming a national issue, I think we'll move in good places.
I think when we look at it, people would be shocked. I mean, would you agree that pretty much everyone you know on Mandan, Hidatsa, and Arikara Reservation probably knows someone very personally or has a close friend who has been either murdered, is missing, or exploited in some way?
Yes, I can truly say in some way or form somebody is connected to somebody that's been murdered and missing on our reservation. In the last year alone, or the last year and a half within our program, we have 5 women that we know of that have been murdered or missing
And
just in our small program.
just because this is going to go statewide and maybe some people nationally will be listening, just give people a sense of the population size of your reservation.
Living on the reservation, tribal members, there's around 7,000 tribal members. And then also we're inundated with all the oil boom people. But we still have a sense of community where some oil field people have joined our communities, but yet we're still like a closed off community where, we don't associate a lot with outside people.
Yeah, I think I want people to understand that you think about a community the size of 5,000 people, and if 5 women had been murdered in a community that size, it would be national news. But somehow it's not national news when it happens to indigenous women. And that's the challenge that we have, which is raising the awareness and raising the jurisdictional challenges we have. As you said, the lack of protocol, because, people are like, well, was this on or off the reservation? That shouldn't be a question. The question would be when somebody goes missing or is in fact abducted, that it's all hands on deck. Everyone who's there can help. And so I think that that's one of the challenges that we're trying to overcome.
Exactly. And with my friend that went missing, she was actually found about a half a mile north of the reservation boundary when the tribal PD didn't have contact with the county police department, and it wasn't an all hands on deck thing when it shouldn't matter. We're all citizens of the United States. We're all citizens of North Dakota. It shouldn't matter if they were tribal members or who they are. If someone's missing, we all should stick together as one state to help each other and find this person. It's somebody's loved one. I don't care what color they are, and that's why my program is unique. We help everybody. We don't just help Native women. We help anybody that comes through our door, any family that's hurting.
Well, I can't say enough about the work that you're doing, and I just want to raise another issue, which is Fort Berthold became one of the first reservations in the nation to pass comprehensive anti-trafficking legislation. That was your hard-earned reward for making sure that we raise that issue of trafficking. We don't know. We just did a hearing in Indian Affairs. The General Accounting Office was asked to give an accounting of the percentage of victimization in trafficking that is Native American, and they literally can't give us those numbers. That's just not acceptable, especially when the federal government on your reservation plays such a critical role. And that's why we've been really pushing the FBI to elevate all of these issues, to take these cases out of the cold file and start looking at what they're going to do to clear some of these cases and bring people to justice. And so, it doesn't happen without advocates like you on the ground continuing to raise your voice, Sadie. You just have you have made such a difference in Indian country, all across the country, because we tell your stories and we make sure that your voice is amplified through our office. But without you on the ground, creating that opportunity for people to feel like they can, in fact, have a place to go, have people will understand and help them. I just don't see that we're going to get this problem solved anytime soon.
No, thank you for your good words. I feel like it's just a constant battle and a constant struggle. But if enough people get on board and we keep working together, hopefully we'll see some kind of justice for our victims so they know that their reservation is a safe place to live, that North Dakota is a safe place to live. I grew up in a small town off the reservation where my dad was a police officer, and I always felt safe there. But now going back, there's not the same people there. I don't even always feel safe there in that small town. So I think it's more than just even a reservation problem. It's a whole state problem where we all need to work together so everywhere can be safe for our women, for our children, for
Yeah,
our families.
I think when you think about making the reservation in all of North Dakota a safe place, right now because of the jurisdictional challenges, I think a lot of criminals, including sex traffickers, find it a safe haven. To be able to act with impunity, and we certainly saw the national stories as a result of the oil boom, but that's a continuation. It's probably grown to be a much larger issue, but it's a continuation of things that I saw before the oil boom when I was Attorney General working with domestic violence programs, and so it's just so important that we do everything that we can, Sadie, to make. The other piece of this is that when people don't think that there's any justice to be had, people will say, "Well, you got to let it go because nothing will ever happen," and so I think it leads to underreporting of these crimes as well.
Exactly. There's a serious underreporting. Instead of our reservation being a safe haven for women and children, it seems like it's a safe haven for criminals. We've had so many gang members and organized crime and drugs, and now we have meth and heroin. We're looking into methadone clinics. We shouldn't have to be doing things like that, but criminals can come there. They think, oh, this is free land. They can't get me. There's tribal cops here. They don't understand the jurisdiction. The federal government's busy, so it takes a while for federal cases, so the people aren't seeing convictions on a federal level right away. So more and more people are coming. They're getting our women and our children addicted to drugs, which turns to trafficking, which turns to them going missing. It just all revolves together in a big circle. And I want it back to be a safe haven for our families, not for criminals.
Well, when I had a chance to meet with the Attorney General, Jeff Sessions, he doesn't have a lot of experience in Indian country and probably not a lot of awareness of these jurisdictional challenges, and certainly gave him kind of a rundown on this is what happens in Indian country. And, at the end of the day, in our state, you're primarily responsible. You are the cop on the beat. And it's the same discussion that I have with the director of the FBI. You're the cop on the beat. And, I can't overpromise, but the FBI director, I just talked to him a couple weeks ago, right before a hearing, and said, look, what are you doing? And he basically said, as a result of the conversations that he had with me, he's assigned someone to go around and start listening and trying to get to a spot where they can actually respond. And so, Sadie, just want you to know we're working as hard as what we can here to try and get additional resources to folks like you who have been fighting this problem on the ground, that we won't give up until we know that the right protocols are put in place. And another piece of this is the Amber Alert. We just did the big meeting on Amber Alert, trying to make sure that it comes to Indian country, have a bill with Senator McCain. And we're hopeful that that bill can get through the Senate and get through the House, and we will take responsibility for working on an Amber Alert system so that when someone does go missing, we can, in fact, recover them earlier, because those critical first hours are absolutely essential. And when we ignore it for 2 days, it just gets harder and harder to recover victims.
Exactly. The best way right now, what we have, our best resource is Facebook. To share murdered or share missing people is to share it on Facebook. Not everyone has Facebook. Having our own Amber Alert would be great, or connected to the National Amber Alert system, so it could go out so people could immediately start looking. Not, oh, I'm scrolling through Facebook. Oh my gosh, some lady is missing. oh, I might have seen her 2 days ago, you know, and that's how it seems it comes out. And that talking with our law enforcement, that's the calls that they're getting when they do see someone on Facebook. Well, I seen her 2 days ago down the road. She was walking towards so and so place. You know, 2 days
Well,
is a long time ago.
yeah, and the protocol, social media can be a valuable tool, but it can't be the only tool. It's
Yes.
imperfect at best. And so, Sadie, hang in there. To continue to do your great work. We'll be out to see you soon, and we'll keep you posted on what's happening with Savannah's Act.
Oh, thank you so much. And thank you for taking the time and everything that you've done for programs like ours and pushing for the safety of Native women. We
Oh,
really, really appreciate it. I'm even going to cry because it's so
Sadie,
close.
you just keep pushing me back. You keep reminding me that this is a forgotten group of people that we can never be satisfied until they get the same protections that anybody else in this country gets. And you're such a voice for that. And thank you so much. I just love working with you because of your passion, but also your commitment to continuing to provide these services to some of the most vulnerable people in America. You're a great American. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Senator.
You bet. A big thank you to both Lisa and Sadie for joining me today. We must stop these crimes from going unnoticed and unpursued, and we must provide law enforcement with the tools to bring criminals to justice. Every day that I come to work in the United States Senate, I think about women and girls who were so needlessly and tragically lost, and I'll continue to fight to bring justice to their families and to keep our Native communities and every community strong and safe.